The penthouse suite of the Sterling Hotel was bathed in golden light from the setting sun, its massive floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of New York City. Inside, Alexander Carter, a 32-year-old self-made tech billionaire, leaned against the marble counter, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. He had everything, money, power, an empire that stretched across industries, but tonight, none of it felt satisfying. Another business deal closed. Another million made. Another day of feeling nothing. And then, the door opened. A young woman entered the suite, dressed in the hotel's standard housekeeping uniform, a navy dress with white trim, a cleaning cart pushed in front of her. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a low ponytail, her features delicate but tired. She barely spared him a glance as she set down her cleaning supplies. "Evening, sir," she said, her voice neutral, professional. Alexander lifted an eyebrow. He was used to service workers fawning over him, sneaking glances, or tripping over themselves to impress him. But this woman, she didn't care. Not one bit. "What's your name?" he asked, setting down his glass. She didn't look up as she grabbed a feather duster. "Emma." "Emma what?" "Just Emma," she replied curtly, moving toward the bookshelves. Alexander smirked. "Interesting. Well, just Emma, you're the first person to walk into this room and not stare at me like I'm made of gold." "I'm here to clean, not to gawk," she said simply, dusting the edges of a framed photograph. "Refreshing," he mused. "Do you always talk to guests like this?" Emma sighed and turned toward him, arms crossed. "Look, Mr. Carter, I know who you are. Billionaire. Genius. Owner of, what is it? 6 companies. 7. 9, he corrected, intrigued. Right. 9. Congratulations. But I've been cleaning up after rich men for 4 years, and trust me, you're all the same." His smirk faded slightly. "Is that so?" "Yes." She grabbed a fresh cloth and turned back to her work. "You're all charming when you want to be, but deep down, you only care about people who fit into your perfect little world." Alexander leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "And what if I told you you're wrong?" "I'd tell you I don't care," she shot back. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to finish my shift." Alexander studied her, intrigued by the fire in her eyes. No one spoke to him like this. No one dismissed him like he was just another guy in a hotel room. And for the first time in years, he felt something real, an actual challenge. He wasn't going to let her walk away that easily. Alexander didn't move as Emma continued cleaning. He simply watched her, his mind already working. She wasn't impressed by money. That alone made her different from every woman he had ever met. Most people tried to get close to him, to impress him, to be in his world. Emma? She wanted nothing from him. And that made him want her even more. "So, Emma," he said, leaning back against the counter, "if all rich men are the same, does that mean all maids are the same too?" She paused, narrowing her eyes. "Excuse me? I mean, surely you have your own patterns. Your own routines. You walk in, clean, avoid eye contact, and assume every man in a suit is a selfish prick." He smirked. "Seems like a lot of judgment for someone who just met me." Emma scoffed. "I don't need to know you to recognize your type." "My type?" "Yes. The arrogant, entitled type who thinks a smile and a few smooth words can make a woman forget who she is." She threw the cleaning rag into her cart and crossed her arms. "And just so we're clear, I don't date guests." He chuckled. "Who said anything about dating?" Emma's expression didn't change. "Look, Mr. Carter, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not interested. I'm here to do my job. You're here to, I don't know, count your money and drink your whiskey. Let's keep it that way." Alexander was stunned. She really didn't care. Most women would have melted by now, would have at least given him an opening. But Emma? She was shutting him down like he was nothing. And for some reason, that made her even more irresistible. "You don't even know me," he said, pushing off the counter and walking toward her. Emma took a step back. "And I don't want to." He grinned. "Then let's make a deal." She rolled her eyes. "A deal? Seriously?" "Yes. Give me 1 week. Just 1 week to prove that I'm not who you think I am." Emma huffed a laugh. "And what, exactly, do you think will happen in a week?" "I'll show you that I'm different." "You'll show me that you're persistent," she corrected. Alexander tilted his head. "Is that a no?" "That's a, get out of my way so I can finish cleaning and go home." He didn't move. "If I win, you have to go on 1 date with me." Emma let out an exhausted sigh. "And if I win? I'll never bother you again." She hesitated. Just for a second. And Alexander saw it, the flicker of amusement in her eyes, the tiny crack in her ice-cold exterior. 1 week, she repeated, more to herself than him. 1 week, he confirmed. She shook her head, muttering under her breath as she grabbed the mop. "You're going to regret this." Alexander grinned. I doubt it. He had never lost a challenge in his life. And he sure as hell wasn't about to start now. Emma had been sure, absolutely sure, that Alexander would give up after their conversation in the elevator. Rich men didn't chase. They flirted, they pursued, but the second things got too difficult, they walked away. That's what she expected Alexander Carter to do. But she underestimated him. Because by the time she arrived on the top floor, he was already there. She stopped in her tracks, gripping the mop handle tighter as she saw him rolling up the sleeves of his expensive dress shirt, standing beside a cleaning cart that clearly didn't belong to him. Her jaw clenched. "What are you doing?" He grinned, holding up a spray bottle. "Helping." Emma closed her eyes briefly, praying for patience. "Helping with what?" "Cleaning," he said easily, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Figured if I want to understand your world, I should get my hands dirty." She stared at him, waiting for him to crack, to admit this was some kind of joke. He didn't. "You've lost your mind," she muttered, grabbing a fresh rag and walking past him. He followed. Emma tried to ignore him. She really did. But it was impossible when a billionaire was standing next to her, wiping down glass tables like this was his normal Tuesday. She turned to him, exasperated. "You don't belong here." "Says who?" "Says common sense." She gestured at him. "You're a man who probably has people cleaning his house twice a day. You wouldn't last an hour doing my job." Alexander's lips twitched. "Is that a challenge?" Emma huffed. "It's reality." "Well, I guess we'll find out." She rolled her eyes and turned back to scrubbing the mirror. Maybe if she ignored him long enough, he'd get bored. But then. Crash. Emma spun around, eyes widening as she saw Alexander staring at the ground, where a shattered vase lay in 100 expensive pieces. "Oh my God," she whispered. Alexander winced. "Okay, that one's on me." Emma rushed forward, grabbing his arm. "Are you insane? That thing is probably worth more than my entire apartment." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, clearly amused. "You're touching me, just Emma." She dropped his arm immediately. "This isn't funny. If management finds out, I'm the one who's going to get blamed." Alexander's expression sobered. "I'll handle it." Emma ran a hand through her ponytail, her pulse racing. "This is exactly what I meant. You're playing around in a world that has consequences for people like me." A long pause. Then, quietly, "You think I don't understand consequences?" Something about the way he said it made her pause. Before she could respond, he knelt down, started picking up the glass with his bare hands. Emma's stomach twisted. Stop. You'll cut yourself. I can handle it. You're bleeding. He ignored her, collecting the shards into a pile. Emma sighed. This man was impossible. Reluctantly, she grabbed an extra trash bag and handed it to him. At least use this. Alexander took it without argument, and for the next few minutes, they cleaned up the mess together. When they were done, he turned to her, a tiny smirk playing on his lips. Still think I can't last an hour? Emma crossed her arms. You still have 55 minutes left. Alexander laughed. A real laugh. And for the first time, Emma had to fight a smile. Emma didn't want to admit it. She really didn't. But watching Alexander Carter, the Alexander Carter, billionaire, tech mogul, man who probably never lifted a finger in his life, on his knees picking up broken glass had done something to her resolve. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. And yet, all throughout the rest of her shift, she kept catching herself glancing at him. Like right now. Emma was scrubbing down the bathroom sink in one of the penthouse suites while Alexander stood beside her, clumsily attempting to wipe down the massive mirror. Stop watching me, he said without looking away from his task. Emma snapped her head back to her own work. I'm not watching you. He chuckled. Liar. She let out an exasperated sigh. I just don't understand why you're still here. You made your point. No, I haven't. He set down the cleaning spray and turned toward her, leaning casually against the counter. You think I'm only doing this to impress you? That this is some elaborate game? And I get it. I do. But the truth is, his voice softened. I think I needed this. Emma blinked. That was unexpected. You needed to break an expensive vase and fail at wiping mirrors, she asked dryly. Alexander chuckled. No, I needed to see what it's like. To step out of my world for once. Emma searched his face, looking for the usual smug amusement, the teasing arrogance. But there was none. For the first time since meeting him, she saw something else in his eyes. Something real. And that was dangerous. She turned back to the sink, forcing her voice to stay neutral. Well, congratulations. You've experienced 5 hours of hard labor. That doesn't change the fact that you'll go back to your penthouse tonight, sleep in silk sheets, and forget about all of this. Silence. And then. I don't sleep well. Emma froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Alexander wasn't looking at her. He was staring down at the counter, his jaw tight, something unreadable flickering across his face. What? She asked cautiously. He exhaled. I don't sleep well. Haven't in years. He picked up the cleaning cloth again, fiddling with it. You say I'll go back to my penthouse and forget all of this, but the truth is, I can't even enjoy the things I have. Money, power, success, none of it stops my brain from running at 100 miles an hour every night. None of it makes me feel peaceful. Emma's heart did something weird. She wasn't sure if it was sympathy, curiosity, or something else entirely. But before she could decide, he looked up at her. And for the first time since meeting him, she didn't see a billionaire. She just saw a man. A man who, despite having everything, looked lonely. Emma swallowed. That's not my problem. A slow smirk pulled at his lips. I never said it was. She turned back to the sink, scrubbing with way more force than necessary. She needed to remember who she was dealing with. Alexander Carter was still a rich, persistent, impossible man. And she wasn't going to fall for his act. No matter how much he surprised her. By the end of her shift, Emma had one goal: get out of the hotel before Alexander found a new excuse to bother her. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans. She had just stepped out of the staff locker room when she spotted him leaning casually against the hallway wall, hands in his pockets, waiting. Emma groaned. "Oh, for the love of, do you not have a company to run?" Alexander grinned. "It's called delegation, sweetheart." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't call me that." Noted. He pushed off the wall, falling into step beside her as she made her way toward the exit. "So, what does just Emma do after work?" "Let me guess, you rush home, make a cup of tea, and read some depressing novel about lost love and existential dread?" Emma snorted despite herself. "Not even close." "Then tell me." She glanced at him. "Why?" "Because I want to know." The way he said it, calm, simple, sincere, made her stomach tighten. Emma shouldn't answer. She should tell him to mind his own business, that this wasn't part of their ridiculous deal. But for some reason, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "I go to the diner on 8th Street. I eat a late dinner, sometimes with my best friend if she's off work. Then I go home, take a hot shower, and pass out before I have to do it all over again." Alexander's brows lifted slightly, like he hadn't expected her to actually answer. "The diner on 8th, huh?" She immediately regretted saying it. "Don't even think about showing up there," she warned. He pressed a hand to his chest, feigning innocence. "Wouldn't dream of it." Emma rolled her eyes, pushing open the employee exit door and stepping outside. The cool night air wrapped around her as she walked toward the street, her body already exhausted from the long day. Alexander followed. Emma stopped, turning sharply. "This is where you say goodnight and go back to your luxury penthouse." He smirked. "I could. Or I could walk with you." "Why?" "Because our deal isn't over." Emma sighed. "Fine. Walk me to the subway. Then you're done for the night." Alexander grinned. "Deal." They started down the sidewalk, the sounds of the city buzzing around them. Emma expected the walk to be awkward, but surprisingly, it wasn't. At one point, a car honked loudly, making her jump slightly. Alexander noticed. "Not a fan of loud noises?" he asked. She shrugged. "Living in New York, you get used to it. But sudden ones still get me sometimes." He glanced at her. "Bad experience?" Emma hesitated. "Not one I want to talk about with a man who followed me out of my workplace." To her surprise, he nodded. "Fair enough." They walked in silence for another block. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander said, "I wasn't born into money, you know." Emma turned her head. "Could have fooled me." He chuckled. "I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. My mom worked 2 jobs. My dad wasn't around much." He shrugged. "Everything I have, I built from the ground up." Emma frowned. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know you think I don't understand struggle." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "But I do." Emma hated the way her heart did that stupid little skip thing again. Because for a moment, just a moment, she believed him. And that was dangerous. They reached the subway entrance. Emma turned toward him, arms crossed. "This is where you leave." Alexander smirked. "For tonight." She rolled her eyes and stepped toward the stairs. Then. "I'll see you tomorrow, just Emma." She paused. Not because of the words. But because of the way he said them. Like he already knew she wouldn't be able to ignore him. And the worst part? He might be right. Emma told herself that she wasn't thinking about Alexander Carter. She wasn't. She wasn't thinking about the way his voice had sounded when he said, "I'll see you tomorrow, just Emma." She wasn't thinking about the way his expression softened when he talked about his past. And she definitely wasn't wondering if he would actually show up at the diner tonight. Except now she was sitting in her usual booth, staring at the door like an idiot. "Okay," a voice said, dragging Emma out of her thoughts. "What's up with you?" Emma blinked and looked across the table at her best friend, Lena, who was eyeing her with suspicion as she dunked a fry into her milkshake. "Nothing," Emma said quickly, stabbing at her salad. Lena smirked. "That's a lie." Emma sighed. "It's nothing. Just, work stuff." Lena's brows lifted. "Work stuff? Since when do you get flustered over work?" "I'm not flustered." "You totally are." Lena squinted. "Wait, is this about that billionaire guy?" Emma groaned. "Please don't start." "Oh, I'm definitely starting." Lena leaned in. "You're telling me Alexander Carter, the Alexander Carter, is following you around, doing your job, and making it his personal mission to win you over?" Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "Unfortunately." Lena whistled. "And you don't think that's, I don't know, kinda hot?" "No." Lena raised a brow. Emma huffed. "Maybe a little." Lena grinned. "I knew it." Before Emma could argue, the bell above the diner door jingled. Emma didn't have to look to know who had just walked in. Because she felt it. Lena's eyes widened. "Oh my God. Is that?" "Yes," Emma muttered. Alexander spotted her instantly. A slow, cocky smile spread across his face as he strolled toward their booth, hands in his pockets, looking like he owned the entire damn city. "Good evening, just Emma," he said smoothly. Lena actually gasped. "He really calls you that?" Alexander chuckled. "She leaves me no choice." Emma groaned. "What are you doing here?" He slid into the booth right next to her, completely ignoring the fact that she hadn't invited him. "Having dinner." Lena looked between them, eyes sparkling with excitement. "Oh, I like this." Emma shot her a glare. Lena ignored it and turned to Alexander. "So, billionaire boy, tell me, why are you chasing after my best friend?" Alexander smirked. "Because she told me not to." Emma rolled her eyes. "Oh my God." Lena grinned. "That's a terrible reason." Alexander leaned back, his gaze flicking to Emma. "Fine. Then here's the real reason, because she's different. Because she's the first person in a long time who doesn't give a damn about my money or my name. And because," his voice lowered slightly, just enough to make Emma's pulse spike. "She makes me want to prove I'm worth more than just my bank account." The diner felt too warm. Emma swallowed. "That's ridiculous." Lena let out a dreamy sigh. "That's romantic." Emma kicked her under the table. Alexander laughed. And despite everything, despite every warning in her head, Emma almost laughed too. Emma should have kicked him out. She should have told Alexander Carter to get up, walk out of the diner, and never bother her again. But she didn't. Instead, she sat there, trapped in a booth between a billionaire who wouldn't take no for an answer and her best friend, who was enjoying every second of this way too much. "So," Lena said, popping a fry into her mouth, eyes dancing with amusement. "Tell me, Mr. Moneybags, what exactly have you done to prove you're worth more than your bank account?" Alexander smirked. "Spent the entire day cleaning hotel rooms." Lena blinked. Then she looked at Emma. "He's joking, right?" Emma sighed. "I wish." "I take my commitment seriously," Alexander said, stealing one of Lena's fries like he had been part of the group all along. Lena let him. Which meant Emma was officially losing control of this situation. She crossed her arms. "That doesn't prove anything. You played hotel janitor for one day. You'll wake up tomorrow and go right back to your world of billion-dollar deals and private jets." Alexander shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll be too busy shadowing housekeeping again. Emma shot him a look. You wouldn't dare. His smirk deepened. Try me. Lena gasped dramatically. Are we witnessing a rich man voluntarily lowering himself to the ranks of commoners? Somebody call the press. Alexander chuckled, and, God help her, Emma actually liked the sound of it. She needed to shut this down. She needed to remind herself that men like him didn't change. So she grabbed her soda, took a sip, and said flatly, doesn't matter. I still won't go out with you. Lena choked on her drink. Wait, you're saying no? After all of this? Yes. Lena stared at her like she had grown two heads. You have a billionaire, an actual, rich as hell, good-looking billionaire, chasing you, and you're turning him down? Emma set down her glass. Yes. Alexander chuckled, watching her with far too much amusement. She likes the challenge. Emma turned to him. No, I like my peace and quiet. You're sitting in a booth with me right now. I was here first, she shot back. He leaned in slightly. And yet, you haven't left. Emma hated that he had a point. Lena grinned. Oh, this is my new favorite soap opera. Emma ignored her, turning back to Alexander. So what's your endgame, Carter? Let's say, hypothetically, I agree to a date. Then what? Alexander shrugged. Then I show you that you've been wrong about me this entire time. Emma snorted. That's a bold assumption. He smirked. I'm a bold man. Lena sighed dreamily. Okay, I've changed my mind. Emma, you're going on that date. Emma glared at her. I most definitely am not. Lena turned to Alexander. She totally is. Alexander grinned. I know. Emma groaned, shoving her plate away. This was an actual nightmare. And the worst part? She wasn't sure if she actually wanted to wake up from it. Emma stormed out of the diner the moment she paid her bill, her heart pounding for no good reason. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't affected. And she definitely wasn't thinking about how Alexander Carter had looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in the entire damn city. Nope. Not at all. But then, of course, the man in question followed her. Emma, he called, his footsteps catching up to hers on the sidewalk. She didn't slow down. What now, Carter? You left without saying goodbye, he said, mock offended. She sighed. Maybe because I wanted to leave. Alone. Alexander chuckled. You have an interesting definition of alone, considering you were sitting with me for an hour. Emma stopped walking. She turned on her heel, arms crossed. You really think this is cute, don't you? He smirked. I think you're still here talking to me. She hated that he was right. Again. Emma exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Look, Carter, I don't know what kind of thrill you get from chasing after someone who clearly isn't interested, but I promise you, this is a waste of your time. For the first time, his smirk faded. He studied her, his expression unreadable. You really believe that, don't you? Yes. A long pause. Then. Why? Emma blinked. What? Why do you think I'm wasting my time? She scoffed. Because you're you, and I'm me. This is a game to you. And in a week, you'll get bored and move on, just like every other rich guy who... She stopped herself. Too late. Alexander noticed. His gaze sharpened. Just like every other rich guy who, what? Emma clenched her jaw. Forget it. No, he said, voice softer now. Tell me. She looked away, suddenly feeling exposed. It doesn't matter, she muttered. It's not about you. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he took a step closer, too close. Emma should have stepped back. But she didn't. Someone hurt you, he said, his voice lower, gentler. She inhaled sharply. That's none of your business. Alexander studied her for a long moment before nodding. You're right. It's not. Emma blinked. That's it. No prying. No pushing. Just, respect. She didn't know what to do with that. Alexander shoved his hands into his pockets, tilting his head slightly. But for the record, I don't get bored easily. Emma exhaled, shaking her head. Why are you still trying? His lips curved into something softer than a smirk. Something real. Because I like you. Emma's stomach flipped. She hated that it did. Alexander took a step back, like he knew she needed space. Good night, just Emma. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the sidewalk, heart pounding, walls cracking, and absolutely no idea what the hell was happening to her. Emma barely slept. She had spent the entire night replaying Alexander's words in her head. Because I like you. Simple. Direct. Real. And that scared the hell out of her. Because she knew how this story usually ended. Men like Alexander Carter didn't stick around. And yet, the next day, when she walked into work, he was already there. Emma stopped dead in her tracks as she stepped into the penthouse suite and found Alexander, dressed in casual clothes, holding a mop like he actually belonged there. Her lips parted. You've got to be kidding me. He grinned. Good morning, just Emma. She stared at him. You're still doing this? A deal's a deal, he said easily, dipping the mop into the bucket. I've got a week to prove myself. Emma crossed her arms. And this is your strategy? Housekeeping? He smirked. I figured hard labor might impress you. Emma huffed, snatching the mop from his hands. You're holding it wrong. Alexander chuckled but said nothing as she showed him how to do it properly. Big mistake. Because the moment she stepped closer, she realized just how close they actually were. She could smell him. Something expensive, but not overwhelming. Clean. Warm. And when she glanced up, he was already watching her, that stupid, knowing smirk tugging at his lips like he had already won. Emma stepped back immediately. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Like you think you're charming. He grinned. But I am charming. Emma groaned. Unbelievable. They cleaned in silence after that, but the air between them felt different. Charged. And Emma hated it. Because for the first time, she was starting to realize something. Alexander wasn't just flirting. He wasn't just chasing for the sake of the game. He actually wanted her. Not as a conquest. Not as a temporary thrill. But as her. And that was dangerous. Because what scared her more than his persistence, was the fact that she wanted him too. That night, Emma found herself at the diner again. Alone. She told herself she didn't care if Alexander showed up. That it didn't matter. So when the diner door opened and she immediately looked up, her stomach flipping at the sight of him, she hated herself for it. Alexander smirked when he spotted her. Like he knew. He slid into the booth across from her, casual as ever. Miss me? Emma exhaled sharply. You're ridiculous. He grinned. And yet, you haven't told me to leave. Emma opened her mouth. Paused. Damn it. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me to go, Emma. She should. She should shut this down before it was too late. But instead, she sighed. Defeated. And then, softly. One date. Alexander's brows lifted slightly, as if he almost hadn't believed he had one. Then, his smirk slowly turned into something softer. Something real. Tomorrow night, he said, voice lower now. Emma rolled her eyes but didn't say no. And just like that, the walls she had spent years building came crashing down. Because Emma hadn't just agreed to a date. She had agreed to letting Alexander Carter into her heart. And this time, she wasn't sure she wanted to push him away.